everything that I could ever access is already available in the field of consciousness. And when I pick up on something, it's usually something that's non-physically available to me, meaning it's not obvious yet in the moment, but I sense its probability of unfolding in that person or in that group, or its subconscious relevance that people are not picking up on really yet. And so then I translate that, I sense it, I pick it up, I see it, I feel it, and I give it words, I give it some kind of logical explanation, some kind of an instruction perhaps. And so I reflect that, and then people don't always immediately know what it is that is being said or spoken. They usually recognize something about it as true, although sometimes not at all as well. If that separation is too distinct yet between the conscious mind, so to speak, and whatever is going on non-physically and unconsciously or subconsciously, then they might not be able to recognize it at all. And maybe they think I'm saying something crazy, or maybe they just don't understand any of it. But then as time passes, those non-physical things that I could already feel swirling around, they will start to sort of one by one enter their experiential reality, or the slice that they're used to focusing on, the range, the frequency range that they're aware of. And so when it manifests itself more physically, more obviously, more consciously, then suddenly they can sort of put the pieces together, and their higher mind will usually have them have a memory of what I said to sort of click in that knowledge and make sense of it. So in a sense, I'm working together with the higher mind to drop some seeds. Sometimes they're known or understood immediately, and oftentimes they're not. And then it's put in place later on.
Is there anything we can do to speed up the expansion of our consciousness?
It's a bit cliche, but you can't be ready before you're ready. So, I mean, I'm not aware of the things that I'm not aware of, until I'm aware of them, because for whatever reason, I then have the capacity to integrate that information, that knowledge, in a way that's in alignment with my overall journey, my overall consciousness, so that I don't disintegrate, so that I don't become, lose my mind in a way. So, in a way, you could say, no, there's never, you can't rush ahead of yourself. But by simply having a strong desire because I've achieved, in a sense, more of those levels of consciousness than most people have, seemingly. So why is that at my early age that I'm able to do that? I'd say that the ingredient that has sped this up, other than a very strong inclination ever since I can remember, is the strength of my intention, or not strength, but the sense of nothing else matters, and like, I have to figure this out. I want to know these things. I want to understand this. So the stronger your drive is, the stronger your desire is, the faster the process of integration, becoming aware of new stuff and then integrating that, becoming aware of new levels and then integrating that, becoming aware of new frequency domains within your own consciousness and other people's consciousness and the collective consciousness, and then integrating that. But this is a gradual process, because it wouldn't make sense for a kid to suddenly have all the information of a top-level accountant. Like, if a 4-year-old kid would suddenly know all that information, it wouldn't have any, like you say, it wouldn't have any cabinets to file it in. The integration process would not serve it. And since we all have that deeper aspect of our consciousness, which we could loosely call our higher mind, perhaps, that higher mind sort of is in charge of guiding us through these processes of life, one step at a time, at a pace that we are comfortable with integrating. So you will find that you will not, even if you have a desire to know certain things, you're not always shown these things immediately. They will then unfold over time, because you don't have those cabinets yet. You don't have the capacity yet to integrate that properly. So, yes and no, there's a way to speed it up actively, which is simply to reinstate the intention more vividly, to really, not even the intention, because you already have the intention, otherwise you wouldn't be asking the question, otherwise you wouldn't be watching this interview. So the intention is there. The intention for evolution of consciousness, for expansion of consciousness is there. What is required is that you prioritize that above all else, or above a lot of other things at least. If the prioritization has not taken place yet, if you've not seen very clearly within yourself what is truly important to you versus all the other things that might be nice, but they're not as important to you, then you're not really honing your vibrational frequency to the point where you can actually have the preciseness, the accurateness, the focus to penetrate into those newer layers of consciousness, be them subconscious or unconscious, or simply new material. Then you will not have that power. You know, you cannot hammer a piece of paper into the wall, but you can hammer a nail into the wall very easily. It doesn't require any effort. So the more specific, the more precise you have become in your prioritization of self, of what's truly important to you, what's truly important to your life, what's truly important to the world, perhaps, if that at all plugs into your personal theme as well, like what's important for this collective, which is very relevant for my questioning for myself, then you will find the crystallization of that intensity, of that intention, of that desire to form sort of like a one-pointedness that very easily penetrates those levels. So I'd say the way to accelerate this intentionally is to, yes, understand that you have to surrender. You have to let it come when you're ready for it. But you can do whatever you can to be ready for it, to be in that receptive state. And the receptive state is usually not like, you know, sometimes, but it's not usually the picture of being couch potato, for example. It's more like a readiness without anxiety. It's like the readiness to receive without the demand or the insistence that it should come now or it should come in this particular way, you know? So it's this joining sort of this higher energy descending upon you, if you want to visualize it in that way, this which can only be received and surrendered to, that higher cosmic guidance or consciousness. But in order to receive it, you cannot just be closed off and, like, you know, watching your favorite television show. It can come in that way too. Sometimes that's the perfect way to get it. But when it comes to really penetrating more rapidly new levels of consciousness, new layers of consciousness, the meeting point needs to be brought up a notch, so to speak. So that's a combination of surrender and willingness or readiness, the readiness to receive, to be in that sort of high frequency, non-anxiety mode of enhanced perception where you have this clarity of knowing your priority. And when you're in the awareness of what's truly important to you, you're in the vibrational state of that prioritized intention, and then that level of consciousness can sort of unveil itself to you and be integrated consequently.
You have opinions, right? I mean, you have preferences and opinions. Am I right?
In a way, sort of.
What's different from your opinions and my opinions?
Let's just, instead of using your opinions, let's just say generically for most people what we understand as opinions. So there's two categories of opinions for me, from my point of view, like how I use them. One is, say, I like this potato chips better than these potato chips. That's it. It's a preference. So there's a difference, right, between an opinion and a preference. So I have preferences, correct. I don't really have opinions. So the opinions that do come up for me are always in relationship to a context that is seemingly out of balance in some way, in some aspect. So if I have an opinion, especially when it's offered to other people, with the exception perhaps of opinions that are simply based in experience, meaning I can sort of analyze the situation. Let's say nobody else is involved and it's not about me reflecting anything to anyone. Maybe I read something in a book that's like someone describes their process of running a business, or someone describes their process of going about their meditation, or I might have observations based on experience that would potentially optimize this process for that person. So, but those are not really opinions either. They're just sort of observations as to what's most efficient. So there's efficiency, observations, reflections. But opinions, when I offer opinions, it's in relationship to what is offered, to what is requested. So if I'm with a group and I'm offering an opinion, I can even show it very viscerally. I can show it like I'm this 5-year-old kid that has an opinion about something. So, but that's not my opinion at all. Like, I don't have an opinion. So what's happening is that something occurred in the field And I'm offering that opinion to either reveal someone having a taboo in their subconscious, holding a taboo in their subconscious, that I feel is not going to thrive in the group setting of that scenario. And so I will maybe make a joke, or I will say something, or I will share an opinion that will loosen up the stuck dirt that is laying in that subconscious, and so it will sort of pollute the water of their conscious mind for a little bit with the stuff that they held underneath the surface of the water. So the water can be clear in the puddle, but it's because the dirt all crusted at the bottom. It's all crusted together. So I might toss a pebble in that and like sort of wake up some of that dirt, and it might feel unpleasant in that moment, but it offers that person the reflection of becoming aware of what they held. And so the peace that they had was sort of superficial, and now it's being stirred up, and so that gives them an opportunity to make their peace more lasting, more eternal, more true, more deep. So my opinions are always in relationship to other people having opinions of their own that they're either aware of or not, that usually counters it or balances it or triggers it or brings it to the surface, or that supports someone in their freshly regained belief. It can also happen in that way. It's not all contradictory. It's sometimes also confirming. Let's say someone goes through a new process of having believed for a long time that they're unworthy, and now perhaps they're picking a belief that's perhaps not the ideal belief. It's perhaps not the holistic view. It might still be a counter to the I'm unworthy. It might still sort of come from like, oh yes, but you know, this is what I did yesterday and I feel so good about it. It might still come from a partial view, but if I feel that confirming that and anchoring that in will be more of service in the holistic gradation of their journey, then I will confirm that and I will agree with them and I will become the person that agrees with them to further anchor that in that moment. So I could share an opinion in that context as well. But if I feel that someone already has the awareness to have a more balanced understanding and they no longer need to work with the opposite polarities as much to balance out their negative beliefs, then perhaps I will refrain from confirming or assisting their newly gained belief or point of view with embodying as if I have that point of view as well. I might just stay quiet, or maybe I'll create a little bit of social awkwardness so that there's a little bit of like, yeah, but maybe that's not quite it either. What's the deeper aspect? Oh, this is the deeper truth. So it all depends. It all depends, again, on wherever the person is at.
And is that process for you mental, or is it quick and intuitive?
Interesting question. It's instant and intuitive, and the mental body has to catch up with it. And usually it's very quick and it knows what's going on. But occasionally I have to take a moment to actually analyze and investigate and translate for myself what's going on, to translate to my own mind what's going on. Because sometimes it's just intuitive and I start to feel off, like my bodies are used. Like when the bodies empty themselves from personal bias, I'm talking about the physical body, mental body, emotional body, spiritual body. When they are emptied out and presented in service of others, then that emptiness, when it's sufficiently empty, when it feels something, it's hardly ever because of a personal misalignment. It's mostly because something is out of balance and this being is being called into action to balance it out in some way. That's why when I'm by myself, I feel amazing. When I'm with a group, I can feel all sorts of things. I can feel like anyone else feels, because my bodies will take on the shape of whatever is in the field that needs to then be balanced out. And if I don't feel these things, it would not grab my attention, and I would not pay attention, translate it to myself, and then find the proper wording and timing to give it back to the people in that group, for example, or the person that I'm with. So the bodies become a channel, they become a mirror of information, but the mirror feels the same thing that it's reflecting. When the mirror reflects anger, it feels anger. When the mirror reflects opinion, it feels opinion. So a few years ago, it was very confusing for me at times to understand what was happening, because I would take this too personally and I would believe those were my own points of view. And then I would but I've worked through all this shit. Like, why is this still here? And I would discover after a while that actually it wasn't any of my own stuff. It was me being of service, being called into action in a certain way. And ever since, my life has become way better, because my relational life has become way better for myself, because I understand now when something is actually because of me having a point of view of my own that is excavated and that needs to be seen, or when I'm actually just reflecting on other people and I'm just simply called into action, and what I'm feeling, even though it feels as much as when you feel it, it's not actually personal. So, what was your question?
If it was mental or emotional or how?
Right. So it's always intuitive. It's because I'm hooked up to that field of sensitivity. So I feel that. It's registered, and then usually I'd say the mind understands and sees what's going on. And sometimes it's so complex and layered and multifaceted, and things are contradicting each other within one person, let alone a group, that I need some time to review some of the things that were perhaps said. And this can happen in seconds, and sometimes it takes like a longer period of time, and it's not resolved immediately there at that scenario. Maybe an hour later I understand it. Okay, this happened there. You have to connect all the dots to really clearly understand where your position is in this. And this helps me grow. This helps me fine-tune, expand my brain and expand my consciousness. But basically it's intuitive. And the mind is what allows it to translate into something that's usable as a reflection to other people or to yourself.
So what would you say if before that hour had passed, before you had like connected the dots and made sense of something, and somebody was like, well, somebody kind of called you out on it or asked you about like, why, what's up with what's wrong or whatever? How do you?
Yeah, it depends on the situation. I might say like, I don't know, something is happening. I'm feeling something. I just need some time to figure out exactly what it is, or maybe they have some beliefs about, I'm just triggered in that scenario, or I don't know, different things happen.
So is it, and figuring out between whether or not it's, you still have things that are still your own, like that still happens?
Oh yeah, for sure.
So.
But yeah, because I'm ever expanding. So as long as the expansion process happens, things will be unveiled, new things will be seen and realized, and then consequently the construct that is the individuator needs to sort of adjust itself to what has been newly received, seen, or unveiled. So the construct is constantly readjusting itself. It's not so much that it just becomes way less basic and rudimentary and less animalistic, so to speak. It becomes very fine. It becomes very fine, very subtle, very like, oh, I'm expanding it to this next level. What is it that I need to let go of that served me in the previous paradigm? What construct was I constructing so that I could have an experience, an experiential reality? But now that I'm changing my experiential reality, my paradigm, my frequency, my construct needs to change as well. So then I get new information and I see whatever I've been holding on to for the previous period of time, which was serving me at that time, but which now needs to be sort of acknowledged and let go of in order to fully make a new construct that serves the new paradigm, that allows the new non-physical level to be realized and made manifest physically here.
Is this what just happened with you? Is this what you kind of described when you said that there's like, you're feeling this process happening?
Yeah, I'd say so. It's always a variation of that.
But it's the same. It's that something you're completely reconstructing.
Yeah, you're realizing something new. You're revamping yourself, and you feel that what used to be really exciting to you no longer excites you. It's no longer relevant for your theme, and so you're guided to move on from that into another level of being someone. And so you're constantly rebirthing your personality construct, even though you don't really have a solid personality anymore. But still the constructs that are the beliefs, that are the perspectives that are required to have that reality experience need to rearrange themselves, need to expand themselves, need to transform. So that's like the metamorphosis of, becoming a butterfly, turning from caterpillar into butterfly is a continuous process. Then you fly around for a bit, but you turn into, you enter another cocoon and then you turn into another bigger butterfly.
And you identify this by having a new set of preferences, having new excitement, or it's because you don't identify with, it's like a worldview, or it's preferences?
I'm not sure what you mean by worldview.
By worldview, I mean like filing cabinet system. Like you've got an existing system and this is how things make sense. And is it that it stops making sense? You know how you said how like when you go from one level to the next, there's always a paradox?
Yeah. It can be any of these. Usually I'd say the way that I feel this coming is that I don't quite feel as good for about a week or two. I don't quite feel as free. I don't quite feel as turned on. I don't quite feel as excited, as alive, as on a roll. I feel like there's this very gradual dull that comes over me, this dulling down. And then it's like, that's sort of me entering the cocoon surrounding me. And then it's like, at some point I realize I'm in the cocoon because it goes so gradually. And I'm like, I'm not where I was 2 weeks ago. Like, I don't feel the same way. What's happening? And that's sort of usually the time where I pop through that into something new, and then the bliss reinvigorates me as soon as I let go of that old structure and see and extract all the learning I need to from that old paradigm, acknowledge it, let it go, and fully step into the next reality.
You said something about higher and higher frequency domains, and I guess this should be obvious because you talk about to no end, but I've kind of always thought that there's like the highest frequency domain, which is just like feeling fucking awesome, like the best you can possibly feel. But then I guess I just now realized for the first time when you said that like there's higher and higher and higher frequency domains, right? So is that just like more and more balance, more and more, or is it higher and higher and higher, or is it like more in...
It's both. Higher and higher requires more balance, because the balance is basically the container that's then able to integrate those higher vibrations. Those higher vibrations cannot be filed properly, like you said, unless the cabinet is well balanced. You know, if it's tilted to one side, it cannot hold as many documents. Stupid example, perhaps, but so the balance and going higher are synonymous. The more balanced you are, the more you're taken up, so to speak, on this spectrum or ladder of consciousness, of frequency, of understanding, of expansion, of joy, of freedom, of free will, of spiritual power, if you want to call it that. And by spiritual power, I simply mean the freedom to know what's actually happening within yourself, what you actually desire, what's actually relevant for you, and then to execute that in a way that is in alignment with all your core principles. That requires a heightened level of awareness, a heightened level of sensitivity as to what's actually going on within yourself and what your higher mind's actually feeding you, so to speak. So balance is required to go higher in a way that's integrated. Sometimes people have bursts of awakening and spiritual experiences where they perceive the ecstasy of whatever is beyond this physical life and that kind of stuff. And it's fine to have that experience. Obviously, that's also allowed by the higher mind. But if the file cabinet isn't ready, if it's tilted, if the person construct has not developed, has not trained its awareness to be able to understand information and appropriately sort of integrate it, then you will find that those people end up in psych wards, or they will not be understood, or they will find that their social life takes a I don't know, jump for the words.
Yeah. So you're with probable realities. Is that something that all of us have access to, or is that something that's...
Oh, for sure. Yeah. In fact, from my point of view, it's kind of funny or interesting that people don't notice that they do have that access.
This is one of those things. It's like, because I think it's a familiar concept, but
right.
You're bringing awareness to it.
So it's quite literally like seeing probable vibratory fields around a particular person and around their life and around their probable futures. It's kind of hard to explain, but it's like, instead of focusing just on the physical aspect and the physical appearance of other people, for example, if we use our relationship to other people in regards to your question, then instead of just focusing on their bodies and how we have taught ourselves to focus on, oh, this is that person over there and this is me over there. If we sort of widen our focus or relax our focus and we become more intuitive, we start thinking and sensing more from, say, the heart or the gut rather than the mind of separation, more in an openness, relating more to the space that we're in rather than the objects in the space. Seeing the objects in the space, but also surrounding those objects with our consciousness, with our energy, with our feeling state. If we include our feeling state in the space that we're in and the people that are walking around within that space, you can start to experience that there's this sort of field that connects all these objects within the field. And the field holds all the information, and the field is actually what guides these extensions that we call the physical bodies to move in a certain way, or to say this, or to say that. And then you can start to pick up on things in that field because you're aware of the field. Whereas previously you were only aware of the field with your gut or with your heart, but you were caught up with the mind. So you weren't aware of the things you were aware of. And maybe you felt awkward because something felt off, but you have no clue what's going on. Whereas if you feel awkward and you see why you're feeling awkward, it's because there was a ripple in the field and something happened that was sort of out of alignment for one person in the group, and now other people are responding to it with their like beliefs, and they get sort of twisted, and then you get this social awkwardness feeling. If you bring your feeling state, your intuition sensitivity, into the field that contains all the objects, then you can start to actually become aware of it and sort of not pick it apart, but know what's going on and influence it and be the clearest person in the room and be able to guide it back into alignment if necessary. And then you also get phenomena like telepathy and knowing what people are experiencing and that kind of stuff. It's because you're in the field. I was, the week before here, I was with a group of friends back from my teenage years from Holland. And they're not into this stuff really. Well, there's like one or two people that are sort of into it. But we were playing this card game, and at some point I say like, pick a card, right? Pick a card in your mind, and I guessed the card. And she's like, oh shit. And then I asked someone else, like, pick a card, and it took me like 2 tries to get the second one right. And then she got a little freaked out. She was like, but in a fun way, like she makes everything funny. It wasn't a big deal, but she was like, now I'm really afraid that you can like know what I'm thinking, and what if I'm thinking really dirty things and you can look into my brain? I say, well, it's not exactly like that. It's more that I can experience whatever you're experiencing. And so she was a little freaked out. It was kind of funny. It was funny because I'm used to being around people that understand this more. So it was fun to be in one house with 8 other people for a week that are not into this, and sort of like having a completely different role there, just being like a buddy and a friend, and like, but then this moment was interesting because that showed me the contrast of how much I'm used to this and how little some people are used to this, like how weird or foreign of a concept it still is. So it's interesting to me that we are swimming in this ocean of vibration. We are swimming in this field that connects all the people that are in that field, including the whole collective, including the universe. Everything is accessible in that way. But very few people know that or understand that. And when some science or some evidence is provided that that is possible, for example, through that of guessing the card that you're having in your mind, the fact that it still freaks people out is interesting to me because it's such a natural concept now. So, yeah, everyone has access to it. It's just that we don't know that we do. And when we do know that we do, we can start to open up in that way, and everyone can access it, and we can all start to communicate with less words. And when the words are spoken, they are to confirm things rather than to ask things, perhaps. Or they are to sort of put that final stamp on the balancing aspect of whatever happened energetically that settles in the balance, that sort of states the balance, you know, like abracadabra, or like sesame open, or what's it called? Open sesame. Just like a powerful word that confirms the balance that has already been reestablished. So then words become sort of, well, secondary, or used for fun, for like joking around or like making fun of things, or I don't know. But we no longer need to assume that we don't know what's going on with each other and then talk about it. It's more like, we know what's going on. Let's maybe talk about it if we need to. Or let's just notice it and like, you can even send vibrations back and forth, or send thoughts back and forth that can then balance out the whole situation. And it's like, oh. And sometimes when I'm with someone that perhaps feels out of alignment, I feel like I have the allowance, again, like I'm working, I feel you can also become aware of their higher mind and sort of communicate with that higher mind to most fully serve the person. But let's say that the person feels somewhat out of alignment, or there's confusion, or they're seeking sometimes I feel that I am allowed to sort of overwhelm them by sending them vibrations of love and light, and everything is all is well, and this is joyful, and this is free. And then they can pick up on that, and it can resolve the situation. But oftentimes, actually, I feel I do not have that permission, because they are meant to work through that process themselves. And so I'm more guided to be there in the way of talking to them, or investigating with them, or asking them the right questions, perhaps, that might facilitate the process. Or sometimes even putting a little bit of pressure on them, or sometimes taking a little bit of pressure off of them, depending on what it feels like they require to sort of pop into that next level of awareness and then integrate that properly. But it's also fun to notice that sometimes I do feel I'm allowed to just like, boom, and then you can see the person going, I don't know what happened, but I feel great. So that can be helpful, but in most cases that's not the most helpful, because then they haven't learned as much, usually. You know? They haven't like figured it out. They haven't like understood it and integrated it. It's just sort of taken away their misalignment. But next time it happens, perhaps they don't have the tools that they would have had they actually figured it out and gone through the somewhat more tedious process of investigation and verbalization and going back and forth until the epiphany that brings the relief and the connection and the alignment has been established out of one's own volition and engagement with one's own process. So, for example, when Jesus performed his miracles or did the healings, it was a very different time, meaning that not everything was documented, not everything was as public. So there was already more allowance. Also, there was more of a sense of like every time on this earth and every culture is different and has a different sub-collective with slightly different agreements as to what is possible, what is plausible, what is mystery, what is assigned to God. So let's say that you're in a culture where everyone understands that miracles are totally possible, except they attribute everything to some other entity called God, for example. Now, if some person comes along, someone along the lines of Jesus, that then is understood to be the spokesperson for God on behalf of that entity, he can sort of channel that information. Then it makes sense that if that entity finds someone that is, say, crippled, and he moves his hand like this and he commands that in the name of God, you are now healed, it fits with their collective consciousness to do so. And so that healing would actually stick and would most likely be permanent, because the person has the belief system in place, the cabinet, the filing system in place, to file this experience, this data, this information appropriately to where it integrates, where it sticks, where they attribute it to God, and so they feel permitted to be healed. So a culture like that has the required belief system in place to understand an experience like that without it blowing their minds, perhaps, because they attribute it to something they understand or think they understand. They have a concept of God, and God does miraculous things all the time. Or if you take this back even further, when there were a lot of, say, UFO sightings or visitations or those kinds of experiences, these, say, Mayan cultures, for example, it wouldn't be very surprising to them if they saw a light in the sky or something like that. So depending on the culture and what they've experienced and what they've agreed to experience as normal, even if it's less normal perhaps than hunting, it's still within their paradigm of what's possible. So when something like that is performed, when they see a light in the sky or where someone is healed, as long as they have the understanding of it being possible, and their sub-collective consciousness agrees upon that being a possible reality, then A, the reality sticks, the healing is not temporary, it's not just pasting a band-aid on something that hurts, it's actually addressing the cause of it and altering that reality. So it sticks with them because they understand it and they believe it's possible. But also, it's not blowing their mind against their free will. So you're not infringing upon what you could call sort of the law of confusion, which needs to be upheld. But let's say that I or anyone else in this present-day civilization, where there is iPhones recording everything all the time, everything gets uploaded to YouTube instantly, it's almost like, even though there's more freedom to explore things, at the same time there's less freedom to actually do the abnormal, because as soon as the abnormal is performed or is executed, it will have that much more of a probability of infringing upon the collective agreements. And if people are not ready to accept that these things are possible, then these things are not allowed to be shown in that way. Only on like a case-by-case basis in private when nothing is being recorded and when that person already has belief systems in place that would allow for this experience. That's why any healer or any teacher has very different experiences depending on the person they work with, because you're literally working with the belief systems that that person has in place and a theme that's relevant for them to explore. So it's never generic. You can never generalize this experience of healing or performing miracles. It's always on a case-by-case basis. So it requires the utmost sensitivity to be able to tune into what's even possible in that moment, or rather what would not infringe upon the law of confusion or free will. So we can only unconfuse people by offering the example of how we can live within the parameters of what they understand as sort of possible, and we can stretch that a little bit at a time. But if we go too far beyond that paradigm, all of a sudden, it is, again, like what I shared previously, it will not be integrated. It will be disintegrating. It will be chaotic. It will not serve their journey as much as when it's done gently or gradually. So we can only stretch the boundaries of the law of confusion, but we're not allowed to actually infringe upon it and, hey, let me show you what's possible. You can do this, you can do that. It wouldn't make sense to people's journeys. So it's a case-by-case basis, and you just sense, based on the sensitivity of the field, like I was saying earlier, if you bring your feeling state into the field that connects all the objects within the field, then you will find that you can start to pick up on vibrations and what's relevant for someone, what's not relevant for someone, what's serving them, what's not serving them, what's pushing it to the limit, sort of, and when you can and when you can't, or when you should take some of the pressure off again. So it's a very delicate case-by-case basis matter. There's no guidebook for it. Shepherding consciousness indeed means you're not just blowing the roof off of everyone's consciousness. Yeah, you're shepherding consciousness is a term that I reserve for the utmost balanced consciousness or being. So it's not just people that want to serve. There's tons of people that want to serve, but I've reserved this term for a consciousness or an individual that has developed themselves sufficiently enough to where that balance is so emptied out of personal self and bias that they can actually be sensitive to what's relevant for some other person. Because only in that state of emptiness and clarity and intuitiveness can you be truly of service without imposing your own beliefs upon the situation. And this is what a lot of teachers and healers are working with at their own edge. They're playing with that, like, okay, am I allowed to heal this person? If so, how much? There's many people practicing this. But shepherding consciousness, if we're talking about it sort of being close to the ultimate that a human being could achieve when it comes to shepherding consciousness, there is such a fine balance between... First of all, there's such an acceptance of the fact that people are at where they are at, that the sort of the egoic or eager, youthful sense of I want to change the world, or I want to save this person, or I want to heal this person, is no longer driven by personal bias, because it's actually understood that everything is essentially perfect, and that even what seems to be out of alignment is in service of the journey of the individual that you're talking to, that you're engaging with. So you have to have a whole picture of the being that you're interacting with, a holistic view of their journey, and not coming from a place at all of, hey, you seem to be crippled, let me help you out. It needs to really be understood, why are they crippled? Is it still serving them to be crippled? Are they crippled because they have out-of-alignment beliefs? Are they crippled because they used to have out-of-alignment beliefs, but now that they're used to being crippled, they have beliefs that they are crippled, which continue the experience of being crippled when they no longer have to be crippled? Do they still continue to need to be crippled? Have they extracted all the learning from that experience, etc.? So you need to be really sensitive, without having to communicate this verbally per se. You need to be really sensitive to someone's field to understand where they're at in that journey, in order to know exactly what you can offer at what time and how you're offering it. So it's a case-by-case basis, and it requires the utmost sensitivity and most of all, it requires someone to have gone through a lot of experience of being really willing and devoted to be of the utmost service without including their personal bias in that experience. There has to be an emptiness of self in order to fully be a reflective mirror that would be able to have that shepherding consciousness. But yeah, it's definitely not about showing off and ripping roofs off of houses, because, I mean, that's the youthful version of shepherding consciousness. But over time, you learn that that's not the best thing to do.
So the same counts for delivering truths to people?
Absolutely, the same thing applies to delivering truths to people, yeah. Instruction, spiritual instruction, yeah. That's why every retreat is different. That's why, depending on the crowd, if there's a lot of new people coming to my retreat, I feel personally less permitted to go in depth. Whereas if it's like an interview like this that's posted on YouTube, where every person can be guided to that individually as their higher mind pleases to guide them, then it gives me much more freedom to go in depth, because it's up to the person to either take that or not. But if people come to my retreat, for example, and they have a certain expectation of, oh, he's going to teach me how to manifest this house that I desire, or he's going to teach me how to achieve peace of mind, then I'm not allowed to go as deep. And so it's more of a generic, basic retreat. But if the retreat consists of perhaps fewer people, or people that have gone through Trinfinity Academy lessons and that are more matured in my information, or that have followed me for a long time, if the majority of the people are part of that retreat, then there's sort of a collective voting happening. And the vote is for, let's take this to the next level. And when I feel that collective vote from the people that I'm interacting with, and it's in an enclosed environment, then we can take it that much further, because I feel I have that permission. So it also works that way with groups, and it works that way with the entire collective as well. So with some of the projects that we are working on at Trinfinity, we also have to be sensitive as to the timing of when to do what, or when to engage with what, or when to release what, etc. It's all, plugged into the collective as one being, gradually evolving. Rapidly, but gradually. So there's a lot of sensitivity involved. It's not just like, oh, I have a great idea, let's do this. It's a process. It requires a holistic view of things to really execute it successfully to a point where, yes, it expands what's possible, and it allows it to be integrated by the people you're serving. And to really have that patience and that balance with that requires a lot of emptying out of your personal biases.
A few weeks ago when we were with the team, there was like this, at Joe's house, there was this sort of feeling that we all noticed, and it was very sweet, and it felt, borderline telepathy, and kind of all sort of operating as one. And I remember you said, isn't it interesting that still the thing that's kind of like working on us is safety? When did you get over that? When did safety stop becoming a factor for you?
I'm not sure when I stopped caring in that way. I think it's a natural result of just being so grounded in your own energy, being so grounded in the field, and being grounded in a more expanded sense of awareness and identity, that those activating, call them chakras if you want, those intersections of energy no longer flare up in that way when there's a situation that you've defined in your past as being dangerous, or like you need to protect yourself. And yes, it's interesting to notice that even in a group that, where the focal point or the goal of the group, or the intention that thrives, that makes that group thrive, is fourth density living, which is connected, telepathic, free from concerns and worries and fears, as one being. It's interesting to notice in those amplified moments of connection that still the thing that prevents that from being the case all the time is that we're still in our own bubble of like, how do I come across, or how is this, or what, So, I don't know how to stop caring. Just like shift your vibration, shift your awareness, expand. Don't identify with the thing that feels afraid, which is the body. It's that body focalization that makes us feel so at stake. When you start to really gain the feeling state of the I am and the presence and the awareness and even the infinity beyond all that, including all that, it just becomes harder and harder to hold on to that separate point of view. Now, it can still flare up, but then you notice it, and it's very easy to unfold it, to unwind it. When there's sufficient experience of one's true self, then there is naturally no fear of others, because are we not one? There's no separation.
What's required to fully resolve the fear of not being safe?
Yeah, awareness. Not really time or practice so much. A little bit of practice maybe. A little bit of time, but mostly awareness. Awareness of the fact that that's still happening within oneself, and awareness of the ridiculousness of doing that, and the non-necessity of it, the redundancy of it. So awareness of the fact that it's still going on, and awareness of the redundancy of it. Then that cuts through a lot of time and practice. You only need practice if you're not really aware of the redundancy of what you've previously practiced. You don't have to really practice your new paradigm that much when you realize your old paradigm is redundant. Awareness is key. Prioritization. Having your priorities straight. Seeing what you're doing and seeing that it doesn't make sense. This whole journey is very capable of being guided by the intellect. In a way, the intellect is what becomes intuitive. Intuition and intellect really are the same mental body, picking up on things, being able to translate things. If someone was to simply be very clear in their thinking, in their analyzing, they could achieve a very profound state of freedom and enlightenment, because when you are very, very logical, you can see that something doesn't make sense anymore. So when you see that you've been practicing this egoic response or this fear response, and you really clearly see that it's redundant, then you'll stop doing it. It's a very logical progress. Awareness is required for any change. That's really all. Awareness of what's happening, and then prioritize. Become more logical.
It's easy for you, it seems, to sort of define what's happening and then move into your new definition. I mean, I think
that takes practice, I guess. I've had a lot of practice.
I mean, it feels like the creative part of all of this. It's like.
So are you referring to like having this whole field of information and then being able to pick out what's most relevant and what's the obstacle, what is the solution to the obstacle, and what's the new paradigm, or what's the most relevant thing, or what's the most important?
Sort of. It's like when you're teaching and you can explain exactly what just happened, or like what you're going, if this was a peak and this was a valley or whatever. I mean, you've got this really concise, feel-good way to interpret everything. And I think that's one of the reasons you're such a relief for so many people, is because they can't come up with those definitions on their own, or at least it's a lot harder. So because you've got this story about what just happened.
Nice. Yeah, I like that perception. And I agree that, that takes practice. It requires gaining a bigger dictionary, a larger dictionary, with more definitions at your disposal at any given moment, more perspectives of each scenario. You need to be able to see each scenario from multiple angles. When you train yourself to do that, it becomes much quicker to respond to a scenario from all these different angles and then choose the angle that combines the most balanced approach. But you can't really do that if you're coming from a very biased point of view. That's why I say shepherding consciousness is kind of up there in terms of evolution of human consciousness, because, in my opinion, because it really requires that practice of becoming unbiased, seeing a scenario not from your own point of view, but from all points of view, and then choosing the transcending point of view that sort of includes all the balances and imbalances of all these lower points of view, so that the actual point of view that's being executed and chosen in that moment is the most balanced that you can think of in that moment. And that happens faster and faster, that responsiveness. But then as you get better and better at that, your higher mind will throw more and more complex situations at you. It's like a puzzler moving through the different gradations of puzzles. You just get bigger and bigger puzzles to solve. And the better you become at it, the more you're allowed to serve humanity at a larger, grander scale, so to speak. So ideally, our politicians would have this capacity, For example, our leaders, those that we look up to, would have those kinds of skills, well trained. And that's how in different civilizations and in different cultures, even on our own planet, this tends to happen. The leader is chosen naturally by the one that actually shows as the most balanced in his, most fair in his responses and his choices. Yeah, maybe we should create a course for politicians. That'd be cool. Really or just fuck them, bypass the whole system. We'll just start leading from the ground up. That's more exciting, actually.